Hello, and welcome back to the Scaling Therapy Practice. This is James Marland, your host. This is the show where we help therapists take intentional steps towards sustainable growth. This week, I am joined by regular guest host Steve Bisson and Ira Hays as our special guest that's going to talk about niching and niches with us. Welcome.
Thanks.
Good to be back.
And this week, we're going to start off running with our tool, tip, or tech of the week. And while we're talking about marketing for therapists and niching down, one of the best resources I found was this book by Mike Michalowicz called The Pumpkin Plan. The Pumpkin Plan by Mike Michalowicz, in essence, is a book where he takes the illustration of growing a pumpkin and growing the biggest pumpkin and how there are people dedicated to growing the biggest pumpkin and the things they do to make sure they have the best possible pumpkin out there. And then he relates that to your business. There are things you can do and should do to niche down and grow the best business or pumpkin that you can. So it's really entertaining and enlightening. One of the tips that he gives from that book is weed out the losers. And I find that tip great, but also difficult to do, because when you put your energy into things, you care about things, it's really difficult to quote unquote weed out the losers. What do you guys think about that tip?
My experience is that it's once you're invested in it, it's one of those things like I'll invest till I'm broke, so to speak. So it is hard, and I get where you're coming from. But I've also kind of like learned to cut my losses with time. And I think that comes with experience. I think it's not something that I would have done in my first few years in practice. But nowadays, if it doesn't work out in the first few weeks or months, like cut your losses, move on to something new.
Yeah, I think spending time on what feels good, right? And I think you're right. When you're early on, I'm not sure I would have given myself the same advice that I have now, but a year or two in, once people are fully licensed and they find what they're good at, and then they find what they're not good at, that's probably equally as important, I think.
Yeah. Another tip in the book is nurture the winners. If you're going to grow the biggest seed, you cut out some of the vines that aren't growing, and then you feed the ones that are. And just what you said, you kind of find what you're good at and find what is producing the most, and then you hit it. So we're going to talk more about that. The topic this week is, of course, marketing, which is season 2. We're talking all about marketing your therapy practice. And the topic of this week, this session, is niching or niching down. And we have Ira on. He has an interesting therapy niche. Why don't you can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about that, Ira?
Yeah. So my name is Ira Hays. I'm a licensed clinical social worker in New Jersey. I'm currently the director of Center for Wellness, which is a PHP IOP program. And then I also own my own practice, where that's where I niche down a little bit more, although the practice that I work at also kind of helps focus on that niche. And I think, my specialty now has actually changed over the years. About 10 years ago, I was working with mostly oppositional defiant youth, a lot of ODD diagnosed kids in residential programming. And now I work mostly with school phobia and OCD. So I learned finding what I was good at. I was kind of good when I was younger, like meshing well with the younger guys and kind of working with them and helping them develop skills. And then as I learned exposure response prevention and exposure treatment, I kind of shifted my direction to school phobia. I was school-based at the time. I was presented with a problem. We had a bunch of kids not coming to school. It was at a therapy school, and they were like, let's figure this out. So I spent about 4 or 5 years figuring it out, where I think a lot of people weren't doing the same thing as me. So that became my niche. How do I get these kids to school that are phobic?
Cool. That's very interesting. That it's probably going to relate to our last question of the day. Do you find your niche, or does your niche find you? So we'll get into that. So our topic of the day, niching and finding the audience for your practice. I do talk to one of the big topics is, should I niche? Or there's a big fear, I guess, over narrowing yourself and telling people what you stand for and what you don't. So the first question for the panel here is, why are therapists afraid to niche down?
Well, I think it's because you're go into a business, and I can tell you from experience, for myself as well as a lot of people, you start a business your mental health counselor, your social worker, your like, oh my God, I need to attract the most clients possible.
Mm.
Therefore, I'm going to take the 2-year-old and I'm going to take the 92-year-old. And no matter what they present with, I'm just going to do it because I got to do it, right? I got to fill in those seats, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what happens in a naive way for many. Actually, I would say that I've done this training for starting your own private practice for 6 years now. And I would say that 90% of them, when I talk about niching, they're like, and you can hear the air getting sucked
Mhm.
out of the room. And then 2, 3 years down the road, oh, I'm specialized in OCD with left-handed Jewish people. And you're like, wow, that's pretty niched. And of course, I want to make everyone laugh. But the point is I think that we all end up niching. So the first message
Mm.
of niching is always like, and then after 2 years, like, yeah, I didn't want to work with that 2-year-old with OCD. So it changes in time. I keep on bringing back time. And I think when I think about niche, it's really about time. And I think that'll be one of my go-to points for a whole lot of people is that it takes time.
Mm.
Yeah, I would agree with everything you said. And I think people who are afraid of niching, I think either haven't found it yet or
Mm.
haven't accepted it yet. So maybe they're really good at something or they really enjoy something, but they haven't accepted yet that that's what they're good at. So maybe they got into therapy thinking they're going to work with teenagers and find out that they're really good at, relationship counseling, or vice versa. So I think sometimes, people are nervous that maybe they're not good enough in that niche to kind of take a presence in the niche and that they have to, like you said, fill the seats, supplement as a business, like all those other spots. Generally speaking, I don't think that's as successful, but you know,
Well, you brought up something really interesting is the comparison, right? Like, I'm not good enough or I'm not like this person who, can I even put institute in my name, the institute of whatever, because I don't see people see or have an impression of themselves and they're like, "Oh, I'm just not like this other person." Isn't comparison a big deterrent for niching or niching down?
Well, I do believe so. I think that the comparison is a thief of joy, as I've said many times to my
Mm.
clients. And, like Ira has his specialty, James has his specialty, everyone has their specialty. I would even joke around that for me, I'm a child and family specialist. I went to get my master's in child and family specialist. How many kids and how many families do I see right now? Yes, the total is 0. I do not see anyone like that because I was thrown in jail, not because I was an inmate, nothing wrong with that, but I wasn't the inmate. I was a mental health person. And I really developed like a liking of working in the criminal justice system at that point in the community justice system because it just was my people. I swear a lot. I'm kind of down to earth. I don't really do good with big words because this is my second language. And it turned
Mm.
out to be the perfect match for me, so to speak. And then it grew to parole, it grew to probation, it grew to jail diversion in the community. And nowadays, while I still work with some of those individuals, I work with the other side and what I consider my niche, which is like evolve as you can hear it right now, to first responders themselves and medical staff who are on the other side of who I started with, but nonetheless a specialty that I've developed because of this niche. So I think that once the comparison that I love right now is that I can turn around and say there's not a whole lot to compare with. And that makes it a lot easier. But when I was younger, I was always, well, that guy does better, or he's much calmer, or he's more agitated. He's going to get more out of him. I think that comparison is one of those things where we feel like, and if you have an answer to both of this, and I mean this in the most respectful way, if you can help my imposter syndrome and cure it, I'm very interested. But I think when you talk about comparison, it's the imposter syndrome that kicks in for a whole lot of us when we're starting to niche ourselves. But that would be my 2 cents on that.
Cool.
yeah, no, I think comparison it's tough. It's tough if you don't have that confidence in your like in your niche yet, or you're still building confidence as a new clinician. I think that's why it's hard. Even when I think about myself as a new clinician early on, I'm not sure I had that confidence to compare myself to other people. It wasn't until I found that spot where I stood out, where I could say, like you said, like I'm not sure, like all right, there's some other people doing something similar to me, but I have this unique perspective or I have this unique skill that I could bring to the table that puts me if not in the same caliber, in the same room. Like I'm in part of that conversation. And then as you develop, I feel like you develop, you know, insurmountable confidence in that area. That, the more you help 10 kids, you help 20 kids, you help 100 kids, then by 3, 5, 600 kids, then you're like, okay, now I really have something that, I can niche myself because I've been able to help all these kids.
Yeah, you're describing like you got to have courage to start, and confidence comes after. You don't start with confidence. Like that's just part of starting something new. Um,
Yeah.
but you develop it, as you said, as you have success over time.
And I think you got to put the reps in, not to go too sports related, but I feel like early on and even now, if I want to keep getting better, I got to keep reading books. I got to keep looking at new theories. I got to, stay up to date with everything that's going on. That's why I love, teaching. I teach at Monmouth University as well. I adjunct there sometimes, and I'll take interns whenever I can because it keeps my growth process. Like they bring new stuff to me, and then I'm like, oh wow, if I want to keep up with them, now I got to read this, I got to read that. So I think just having the confidence comes from continually working harder, you know?
So that's some of the reasons why therapists don't niche. What would you say to people, or why should therapists niche down as much as they can? As why should we consider, even why shouldn't we just be serving everybody? Why should we find a niche?
Because I think that what happens is that when you have someone who's niche, you could actually have it's almost like increased confidence. One of the things that occurs with my first responder individuals, they're usually referred by either other first responders or people who work with first responders. And it brings almost, and I wouldn't say automatic because I think that's a bad word, but almost automatic, like, oh, credibility. Okay, Johnny told me he would go see him. Sharon told me he was pretty good. And then by doing so, okay, he knows our language. He knows how we talk. He understands dark humor. He understands how
Mhm.
we survive this stuff. And so, from my perspective, I think that that's why, we get to a point where the niche becomes our friend. But I think until you see it as a friend and you see it as you will always see it as an enemy. And it's really changing that thought process.
Yes. Yeah, I agree with you. And I think with niching, when I'm thinking about niching, I'm always, as a therapist, I'm trying to always balance two things. Whether I'm running a program or it's my own business, it's always making money and then helping the most people, having the most impact as I can. Right. So I'm trying to obviously earn revenue and I do well for myself, but I'm also trying to help as many people as I can. By saying help as many people as I can, you would think, oh, think general, but that's not the case. There's probably a dozen people that can help all those general conditions that I can. But there's only a certain amount of people that can niche down and help the kids that are like school phobic or help with OCD. There's a significantly less people. So by kind of niching down, I'm actually expanding and being able to help a further reach. Like my reach is much further rather than just a couple people. I might have somebody that travels an hour to come see me because I'm able to help them at something that the generalist isn't probably able to help with.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great illustration and example. One of the ways it was described to me is you are taking people on a destination. Like you're trying to find the right people who want to get on your bus to go to the destination that only you can take them. For example, if you're living in, like, I used to live in New York, and you want to go to a trip to Florida, and you want to find people to get on this bus who want to go to Florida. If they're going to Ohio, or I don't know, Utah or something, and then Florida, that's not the trip you want to take with them. You want to get the right people on the bus who are going with you. And then to niche even down further, you say, well, we're going to Universal, or we're going to SeaWorld, or we're going to get a ticket to Disneyland. You're going to take those people to the exact destination that you can, and that helps them. That is helping them get to where they want to go. And because you're the expert in that area, you can take people over and over and over again down this trip, down your niche quicker, faster, better, and probably even cheaper than the other person who doesn't exactly know where they're going. I think we're going to Florida. We might show up, at SeaWorld, but maybe we're going to do Universal. No, you're going to go down to the destination, and the exact people are going to get on, and you take them there. And I just love the journey story of like talking about your dream client or your preferred client or the person you can help the most by thinking about, I'm going somewhere, they want to go there, and this is how I take them over and over and over again. And you become that guy, you become that person to do that. Have you ever heard about the niching down as a journey before?
Can't say I have.
Not like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. It helps me understand that there are people that I can help quicker and better, and there are people that we're just not going on the same trip, and that helps me understand that I need to spend time figuring out who those people are and how to help them. And then all the things that you guys were talking about, like the referrals, the confidence, the credibility, the distinction, and helping more people, that comes when you get known for the type of, I'm putting this in quotes, trip that you're taking, that they know to go to you and not to somebody else.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the most important things, and on the business end of it, when you niche down, you do become more notice for a particular skill. So people know when to find you and for what. And then you can also market that easier too, right? If I just
Mhm.
go in somewhere and say, call me for anything, it's kind of forgettable. But
Yeah.
if I'm at a school and I say, hey, if you have these school phobic kids, that's what I specialize in, I can help, then you start getting calls for trainings and all kind, and, it helps me do business to business marketing way better too. So I'm able to kind of go to other businesses and say, this is what I'm good at. I don't do this. Like I'm not good. When we talked about not knowing what we're not good at, I'm not good at, like you said, 12 and under is not my skill set in terms of my individual practice. And I would say that I don't work a lot with eating disorders. So I build relationships with people that are great at that so that we have this reciprocal relationship and referral service, where we know what each other are good at.
That's a great little marketing tip, right there.
That's what I'm even writing it down
Yeah.
myself.
No, I mean,
Like you
in terms of marketing for something, like knowing your sales funnel is so important, right? And if I know I'm niche down to a certain spot, it helps me narrow who I go to and who I market to. So I know, right? I'm not just marketing to everyone. I'm maybe marketing to, schools and IOP programs and maybe potentially parents. But I'm not directly marketing to my consumer necessarily. I'm marketing to these other companies and other school districts and stuff that need that service. So
Well,
for
they have
me,
a
marketing,
problem. Yeah, they have a
right?
problem they need to solve. So are they gonna call generalist person to solve that problem with the anxious
Right.
kid who won't come to school? Or are they gonna call Ira, who specializes in it, and he's gotten results for his other people? It makes you've just hit on a really great point, that when you niche down, it can make your marketing so much easier.
So much easier because now I know, hey, all I have to do is post like, hey guys, I'm doing a free school phobia training for anyone in New Jersey. Call me if you're ready. And I do that all the time. I offer it for free all the time. And I get school districts. This is my busy season right now, they're having trouble getting kids
Yeah.
back. And they have me come in. And it's great because, I get to help them maybe help 8 or 10 kids. And if they have a couple kids that they can't help, then they know who to call. And if I help them help all of them, that's great. It was an hour well spent. We helped a lot of people. But it definitely helps me to know exactly who to market to based on my niche. It doesn't require me to just send out email flyers and, just like blast everyone because that's not my 80%, the 80/20 rule.
Mhm,
That's not where
mhm.
I'm getting 80% of my work. 80% of my work is coming from very specific sources. So it definitely helps with marketing 100%.
Wow.
Yeah, the mass market. If you're marketing to the masses, you're pretty much just competing on like the lowest common price, which is difficult to run a business when you're just trying to get a small fraction of the large market. It's much easier to to own, your portion of the market, and market to those people. Like a lot less energy that way. It's not free money, people, but it is less work. Like, there's it still takes work. Everything marketing, I feel, takes some thought and work, but
I think that work becomes more rewarding in itself because as I'm marketing for my niche and I'm passionate about my niche, then I'm connecting with more people that may need those services that I never would have
Mm,
met if I was doing general marketing, right? Like I wouldn't meet with some of these schools that are 2 hours away, but I'm able to help some of those kids, even if it's not directly, but I'm able to help the staff that are helping those kids. So I think it expands my reach. And I'm not always worried, a lot of those trainings I'm not worried about, am I going to make money on that hour? That's not really the case. The case is, am I going to be able to help kids? And then if I do, are people going to know me more for that and refer to me if I'm helpful, you know?
awesome.
Right.
So our one of the last questions here is do you find your niche or does your niche find you? Like how do you develop this? We've talked a little bit about it. What has been, maybe this is a story time. Like what's your experience here? We've hit on it, both Steve and Ira have hit on their experience, but how did you actually come up with your target market?
I fell in it backwards.
Just explain that.
So, story time. Again, child and family specialist, but I worked on a crisis team when I had my bachelor's, triaging phone calls, taking up like that stuff. So, police knew me a little bit. When I went to my company at the time, I'm like, "Hey, can I do outpatient? Can I do crisis work?" We got nothing. The only thing we have full time is working at a jail, being the mental health clinician. All right. Well, I want a job. I want to work. Like, I guess I'll go do that. I don't know how my child and family specialty is going to really help out in a male jail, but hey, what the hell? Let's try it. So I go there, actually do okay overall. But at one point, I'm going to save the details, but essentially something happened at the jail. They blamed me for it. It had nothing to do with me, had to do everything with my boss. My boss throws me under the bus, but luckily I signed my paperwork properly. But I go to my boss, I'm like, no way in hell I'm staying here. So I leave. And he's like, "What do you have?" I'll work. I'll work fee for service outpatient. I'll work fee for service for the crisis. It's not like they don't need it on a social service agency. One day, one of my bosses says, "Hey, we just got a contract with Mass State Parole." I'm like, "That's great. Good for you guys. Bravo." I keep on going. No, no, no. We're talking to you. I'm like, "No, you're not talking to me. Bye bye. See you later." Because I don't want to work with community mental health ever again at that point. They bribed me with extra money, which when you're a young 25-year-old, how old was I? 25, 26? I can't remember. And needed the money. Okay, what the hell? I'll try it. And now I fall in love with working in that world because it was crisis clinician. When this happened was in 2006, 2007, when reentry wasn't cool, but I was, we were at the starting point of reentry for people coming out of jail and saying, hey, maybe they need resources to succeed and not have a 66% recidivism rate. And so I start working on that. I get reinforced by parole, probation listens to me. I get involved with the police, and the rest is history. Because even when I decided to leave the community justice social service field, people recognize me like, hey, you're the guy who works with cops. I'm like, I am? I mean, I am. And so that's how, again, the police, fire, I've worked with many other agencies that are in law enforcement started contacting me. I wasn't looking for them. And because my experience in jail, I got a lot of Department of Correction people too. So story time is I was a child and family specialist, fell ass backwards into the community criminal justice system. And here we are today. So that's my story. And I'm sticking to it.
It's a good one. Good one. I I think for me, geez, I mean, I've worked throughout the continuum of care before I kind of found I had several niches, like I said before. It's kind of developed over time as to what I was interested in, what I was good at. But I worked with the SPMI population on a PAC team. I worked for a community mental health center. I worked inpatient. I went to a school because I let out at 3 and I had weekends off and summers off. And I was like, that sounds really great. And
Good
it was a
idea.
therapeutic school. So I thought I had the ability to kind of help more as a clinician at a therapeutic school than I would at a public school. It turned out it opened a lot of doors for me. I was able to consult with different school districts in district schools, and it opened many, many doors to me. But they basically came to me with a problem saying, hey, we have these kids that we can't get in. And I was able to kind of help them solve that problem, learn how to solve the problem over and over again, and then started trying to solve it for other school districts. So to the question, does your niche find you or do you find your niche? I think in most circumstances, my niche has found me. Even when I worked with, kids with ODD, I was working in a residential program. I got trained in CAS and parent management training. I kind of stumbled into that kind of niche for a few, probably 5, 6, 7 years before switching to school based. So I was lucky enough to my niche found me always. And then I just had I guess, the instinct to follow it, which I think is important for people that if they're doing something that they enjoy, they should follow it as much as possible.
And I think that you make a great point there when you think about enjoying it. I think that when we talk about niche, what one of the things that I kind of remind people is that you need to like it. And one of the reasons why, and I'm going to share this and maybe I'll turn it to you guys, but for me, when I worked with children and family, I loved working with the kids. I love working with the teenagers. I did not like to work with the parents. I'm trying to keep it as kid friendly as I can here. But my turnoff with that was oh, that's why the kids screwed up. And I could never get over that because I wanted to deal with, like, talk to the parents, fix them and do that. And obviously you can't always do that like with the parents. So my niche felt that it was too overwhelming for me while you're working with them. So I changed because of that. So sometimes it's also about passion. I still have passion working with kids. I just can't do it on a professional level. So I coach soccer now to kind of like overcompensate my stuff. But I don't know about you, Ira, if this has happened to you or not.
I think it's happened to me in a different way. When I was working with more oppositional, I ended up finding myself in places that were more, there was therapeutic holds and stuff involved. And eventually I didn't really enjoy that kind of setting as much. I then started working with some other stuff in my private practice that worked out well. But I would say the journey was pretty natural for me. Like I, I just kind of followed the path. The path kind of like not to sound too cliche or anything, but the path kind of laid itself out. I got this job at a school, then they came and said, "How do you solve this problem?" The problems I was solving, I started like essentially a closed group on at the school, and then started working with the school filled with kids, and we were able to just help a lot of kids. So I fell right into it. I got lucky.
And I think that that's a little bit of the messages that we need to kind of like pass on for everyone that we work with. If we fall back on something that we don't know and then we fall on it and we love it, I think it's a discovery. And I think that if you work in social services for a while, what I've always recommended to find your niche, work on a crisis team, work in outpatient, work in a large population where you're going to see the 2 to 92. And I realized that working with young kids wasn't my thing because I just couldn't do it. And then the 92-year-olds, anyone over 65, I don't know why, my therapist might need to work on that. But they're all my grandparents and I want to take them home. And when you want to take them home,
Mm.
I mean, that's not a healthy thing. So I'm like, oh, well, no, I can't work with seniors. So one of the other thing about niching, I say work with a general larger population, whether it's the crisis team, whether it's outpatient in a community service, community programs. And I don't know if you have any advice as to how to find our niche because I told you, I fell ass backwards on it. You kind of discovered it as you went along, but I don't know if you have any other advice in regards to that.
Yeah, the advice I usually give like my staff and my interns and stuff is just keep developing. Don't and early on in a career, don't look for I would say the first couple of years, especially if you're, in each state, I know it's a little bit different, but if you have your regular license and you don't have your clinical license yet, and you don't have the autonomy to go on your own, work inpatient, work in a partial, work with different, larger agencies where you can find mentors that you can follow because that mentorship I think is so important to developing. And it should be the first couple of years should be about what do I want to develop? Not necessarily how much money can I make. It's like develop a baseline skill set, 5 or 6 different theories that you're great at, and then the niche will come, I think, very easily after that.
I think what we're talking, James, I think that what I feel is so important that Ira mentioned is that when you're trying to find your niche, like I didn't even think about inpatient, but that's another great place to learn what you don't like and what you do like. But I don't know, James, if you have any advice as to how to discover your niche.
Well, just some of the stuff that you've been talking about is it's okay to dabble, it's okay to to spread your wings a little bit and figure out, I'm going to try this. You mentioned inpatient, you mentioned IOP and day hospital, you mentioned different types of treatment. It's okay to say, I'm going to try this for a period of time, and also know you might not do it for the rest of your life. I think part of my mindset, I don't know if it's my generation or my thought, like, don't waste anything. If you're going to do it, finish your plate, that type of stuff. And I don't know if that serves you very well when you're trying to discover your niche, is just doing one thing and sticking with it forever, even if you enjoy something else more or it's not fulfilling. Another tip, I guess, though, on the other side of that, is once you've found your niche, like, keep the main thing the main thing. There's so many opportunities
Mm.
out there. You go into the school and you probably could help, many of those students, but that would detract you from the thing that, as you were talking about, how fulfilling it is. Like, oh, I get to help these kids and I can do a good job. And it's so fulfilling to me, and it helps their life. Like, if you get distracted by different things, um, that could prevent you from keeping your main thing the main thing. So when you're early, you mentioned all this stuff about time, like you fell into it or it took 5 years to develop this niche. I think we got to be patient with ourselves and give ourselves time to develop into the niche and develop into what who our dream client is and their dream destination, that we can take them. And then once that's been established, then it's time to move into, now I am the Institute of OCD school children, or something like that. So yeah, that's my advice right now, is the pressure, some of that pressure to choose right away as soon as you get out of school, is probably a little bit of your own self and also other people, like, expectations. So that's some of my advice. Be patient with yourself, but once you find it, embrace it.
I really like that.
I was just going to say, I think in terms of the niche, one of the things, like, if you like it, keep going at it. And I also think for me too, it's been really important. There's so much stuff on social media and therapist groups and stuff about burnout. And I've always found that I
Mm.
think, you know, to me, finding a new problem to solve has always prevented that for me. And oftentimes that new problem goes to a new niche, right? So when I was working with oppositional youth, I started to get a little bit burnt out. So I found a new problem to solve. And I think that also, as a therapist, we have so many opportunities that, like, we can niche down, and then we can, somebody who's new and they're not sure, if they do it for 5 years and they're like, you know what, I want to change. There's nothing wrong with that either. I'm in my 40s now. By the
Mhm.
time I'm in my 60s, I might have something completely different that you never know. But I'll just follow that road. But I think it is important that, like, it's okay to, like, change, and it's okay to keep that niche for as long as that niche feels like the most important thing to you. As soon as it doesn't, it's probably okay to find a new problem to solve.
And I just want to mention one thing, James, because I want to observe that the first thing I observed when we were first all three of us, we all have some sort of goatee or beard, and we all have glasses, but none of us specialize in males with glasses and a beard. And yet at the same time, we have three unique perspectives from three different unique people who came from three unique backgrounds and everything else. So I think that what I would also mention before we go on is respect where you came from. And I think that that's the important part too. Like for me, I'm an underdog. I'm a big fan of the underdog. Maybe it's my immigration from Montreal to here that probably got me to be an underdog mentality. And I never forget about that, because a police officer who goes and reach out for mental health right now is a minority underdog. And we need to treasure that. Same thing for my fire guys, same thing for my correctional staff, my paramedics, my sheriffs, and so on and so forth. And I think that one of the things that, if you're going to niche, you talk about how to avoid burnout, remember what your initial passion was. And for me, like, that's something that I always keep in mind.
Yeah, you talked about something that I think is really important, is knowing who your tribe is, knowing who are the people that energize you, because the people you're, going back to the story thing, you're spending a bunch of time with these people, and you're only going to allow, it depends on you. It depends on you, the bus driver, the destination generator. Like, you're going to take people on this journey that you want to spend time with, that you identify with, that they get you, that you could have dinner with and not be like, oh man, I just wish they would leave me alone. I can't wait oh, I got a phone call. I got to go. Those aren't the type of people that will fulfill you the most. And you talked about burnout. If you're serving those type of people who take and they're not, even though you have a service and you're doing, you're charging money, but the people that they can't pay you enough to have another session, those are the people you don't want to be your ideal client. Somebody else they'll fit with somebody else. So that's also another important reason for niching down, is realize it's not just about, who's going to buy my product. It's who can I help? Like, who do I want to help? Who do I want to serve that won't burn me down, burn me out to the ground?
I agree.
All right. So let's move into our takeaway. We'll start with Ira, then go to Steve, and I'll wrap up. What's one takeaway you want the audience to know from this episode? One thing, if they could only remember one thing, what's a takeaway for you?
I mean, it sounds like we all are in the same mindset of like, don't be afraid to niche down. Find what you want to niche down with, and don't be afraid to follow that passion. It'll probably take you pretty far. That's the main thing that I'm taking away. I'm glad I did it. Sounds like other people are glad they did it.
How about you, Steve?
I think there's so many takeaways. I have a full page actually here. I really like this conversation, but I guess the most important one is when, Ira, you mentioned about being, remembered due to your specialty. And I think that that's something to keep in mind when you think about niching. People are like, oh, well, that's going to be too specific. Well, no, that's the advantage. Like it's in my area that I work in on Metro West Boston. I'm one of the first names that come up no matter what about, oh, look, he works with first responders. He works with medical staff. Send it to, like, I'm not saying I'm unique in that way, but there's not many people like that. So therefore I get a lot of phone calls from that. So your niche is actually what will make you most memorable. So that's what I get from this podcast.
Awesome. And I kind of like that, both of you took time and to discover your niche, or maybe it discovered you. Like you said yes to an opportunity, or you saw a need and you filled it, and then it turned into something like and enjoy, and you're helping a lot of people. So I guess my takeaway is let it develop. It's going to take some time, and you're probably going to discover it more than just say, this is what I'm going to do forever for the rest of my life. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
All right. Well, before we wrap up, Ira, thank you so much for being a guest on our show. Where can people find you? Where can people find you? And do you offer any services to help others?
Yes. So they can find me at centerforwellnessnj.com for the partial care and IOP program, and Hays Health and Wellness. That's HAYS, HaysHealthAndWellness.com for any of the stuff that I do in my private practice in terms of training, marketing, whatever they need. I can be helpful, hopefully.
What was that last one again? I'll put it in the show notes, but
it's a Hays, HAYS, Health and Wellness.
Hays Health and Wellness. Okay.
Yeah.
And you do trainings, marketing, and some other things for therapists.
Yeah. Clinical consulting for school districts, just about everything. So you can check it out. And certainly if anyone, I know we were talking before the show with Steve, but like they could find me on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn and love connecting with people too.
Another great tip there, LinkedIn. Find lots of great people. All right. Well, this is the Scaling Therapy Practice, encouraging you to take intentional steps towards sustainable growth. Thanks to Steve and Ira. We will see you guys next time.
Psych Maven is proud to support the Scaling Therapy Practice podcast. If you go to stp.psychmaven.com, you can take our free personal inventory and find out what your builder type is as a helping professional. This assessment is quick and fun, and it comes with tons of customized resources with your results, so you can discover the best ways to scale that match your own personality. Find the assessment at stp.psychmaven.com.
Thank you for listening to the show. Please subscribe to our newsletter. In the newsletter, you will get a free download for a marketing tool. Season 2 is all about marketing, and so I'm providing a tool for people who subscribe to the newsletter. If you haven't subscribed to the newsletter, just go to coursecreationstudio.com and look for subscribe now. If you are not subscribed to our newsletter, you can find the tool in our blog for the episodes. So just go to the podcast and open up the blog, and the tool will be there. This week, the tool is going to be on the steps of the pumpkin plan, just an outline of some of the steps Mike Michalowicz from his book, The Pumpkin Plan, gives to new business owners. I would recommend buying the book. It's probably $10-15. If you listen to it on Audible, he reads it to you and you can just see his personality shine through. It's a good listen, so I definitely do that. If you happen to have a free moment, please go to iTunes or Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcasts and rate and review the show. I really love reading the reviews and the feedback from there. If you have questions on marketing, we have about 5 episodes left to record, and we'd love to get some feedback from the audience. You can send those questions to james@coursecreationstudio.com, and I will definitely bring that to the panel, and we hope to get some follow-up questions from some of the episodes that we have already recorded. Hey, I could not do this alone. I really appreciate the support of the SciCraft Network. Check them out at scicraftnetwork.com. And finally, the Scaling Therapy Practice is for educational and entertainment purposes only. While I do interview professionals like mental health professionals and accountants, they are not your therapist, your accountant, or your lawyer. So if you happen to need professional services, please seek out professionals in those areas and get their advice for your unique situation. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you next time.